Imagine this. You wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, fingers twitching toward your phone before you even realize what you're doing. The screen's glow cuts through the dark, flooding your brain with dopamine before you've had a single conscious thought. You didn't decide to check it, your body moved on its own. Now imagine something worse. You don't even question it. This is addiction, not just to substances, but to distraction, to validation, to the numbing comfort of anything that keeps you from feeling what lurks beneath the surface. And here's the unsettling truth. You are not in control, not really. But what if the real addiction isn't the substance, the screen, or the habit? What if the real addiction is the escape itself? The great paradox of addiction. We live in a world that condemns addicts while feeding the very conditions that create them. We scorn the alcoholic, but normalize the workaholic. We pity the drug user, but ignore the millions scrolling themselves into emotional numbness. We call addiction a disease, yet we refuse to see the sickness in the culture that breeds it. Gabor Maté, the renowned physician and addiction expert, shatters the conventional narrative. He doesn't just ask why people become addicted. He asks, what pain are they trying to escape? Because here's the uncomfortable reality. Addiction is not a choice. It's a response to trauma, to loneliness, to a world that demands productivity but offers no meaning, to childhood wounds that never healed, to the gnawing void of existential dread. So the real question isn't why the addiction, it's why the pain, the illusion of free. Will you like to believe you're in charge of your life? That every decision is yours, every action a product of conscious thought? But what if your deepest compulsions were programmed into you before you could even speak? Studies on childhood development reveal a haunting truth. Your nervous system learns to cope before your mind learns to reason. If you grew up in chaos, your brain wired itself for hypervigilance. If you grew up unseen, it wired itself for craving external validation. If you grew up powerless, it wired itself for control or for surrender. By the time you're an adult, these patterns don't feel like coping mechanisms. They feel like you. So when you reach for that drink, that drug, that endless scroll, you're not making a choice. You're obeying an old survival script. You're not making a choice. You're obeying an old survival script. The existential dilemma. Now, the deeper question, what are you running from? Not just stress, not just boredom, but the terrifying freedom of being fully alive. The weight of your own potential, the crushing awareness that life has no built-in meaning, that you must create it yourself. Jean-Paul Sartre calls this the dizziness of freedom. Friedrich Nietzsche warned that man would rather will nothingness than not will at all. In other words, people will choose suffering over uncertainty, because addiction, at its core, is a substitute for purpose. It's a way to feel something, even if that something is pain, rather than face the abyss of emptiness. The unanswered question. So here you are, a creature of conditioned reflexes, shaped by wounds you don't fully remember, seeking relief in ways that only deepen the ache. But what if there was another way? What if the very thing you're avoiding, the pain, the void, the unanswerable questions, holds the key to your liberation? This is where the real journey begins. You've been taught that addiction is a failure of willpower, that if you just tried harder, you could quit, that the addict is morally weak, lacking discipline, a drain on society. But what if everything you've been told is wrong? Gabor Maté's work reveals a radical truth. Addiction is not a character flaw, it's an adaptation, a desperate, unconscious survival strategy forged in the fires of unmet needs. So let's excavate the real roots. The myth of the bad addict society divides people into two categories, the healthy and the addicted. But this is a lie. The difference between a Wall Street banker hooked on adrenaline, a suburban mom dependent on wine, and a homeless man smoking crack isn't the nature of their addiction. It's the social acceptability of their coping mechanism. Carl Jung saw this clearly. Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism, yet we reward some addictions and punish others. Why? Because modern capitalism thrives on compartmentalized suffering. It needs you just functional enough to work, consume, and scroll, but never healed enough to question the system, the biology of disconnection. Here's where it gets darker. Neuroscience confirms that addiction lives in the brain's reward pathways, but those pathways don't malfunction in a vacuum. They're shaped by early environment. Children who experience neglect, abuse, or chronic stress develop overactive stress response systems. Their brains become wired to seek relief at any cost. The psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk explains, the body keeps the score, so when an adult reaches for a substance or behavior that soothes, they're not making a free choice. They're obeying a biological imperative imprinted in childhood. This is why willpower fails. You can't out-logic a nervous system trained for survival. The philosophy of escape but biology alone doesn't explain the depth of addiction's grip. Arthur Schopenhauer saw human life as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. We suffer when we don't get what we want, and we suffer when we do. Addiction is the futile attempt to stop the pendulum, to numb the pain without confronting the void that follows. Aldous Huxley foresaw this in Brave New World, where society pacifies itself with pleasure because facing truth is too terrifying. Sound familiar, right? The cult of distraction. Now, the most insidious twist. Modern society doesn't just allow addiction, it engineers it. Social media exploits vulnerability. Processed food hijacks dopamine. Dating apps turn intimacy into a slot machine. We live in what philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the burnout society, one that pathologizes rest and monetizes distraction. So when you blame yourself for your addictions, you're missing the point. You're not weak. You're outmatched. The real question isn't why can't I quit? It's why would I? In a world this chaotic, addiction isn't irrational. It's the only relief valve many people have. The fork in the road. This is the hidden crisis. We've built a civilization that creates the very pain. It then punishes people for escaping. But there's a way out, one that doesn't rely on shame, willpower, or superficial fixes. It starts with asking a question so dangerous most never dare. What if healing isn't about quitting your addiction, but about understanding what it's trying to tell you? The real danger of addiction isn't the substance, the behavior, or even the immediate consequences. It's what happens to you, the slow, imperceptible erosion of your soul. Let's pull back the curtain, the disappearing self. Addiction doesn't just alter your habits, it rewires your identity. Very time you numb yourself to avoid pain, you lose a fragment of your ability to feel not just suffering but joy, connection, meaning. Fyodor Dostoevsky, who wrestled with gambling addiction, wrote, "Man is a creature who can get used to anything, and that is the best definition of him." But this adaptability is a double-edged sword. The more you rely on external coping mechanisms, the more you hollow out your internal resilience. You become a ghost in your own life. Present but not alive. Going through motions but never truly experiencing. The illusion of control. Here's the cruel irony. Addiction convinces you that you're in charge, that this drink, this pill, this binge is a choice. But the deeper you sink, the more your autonomy slips away. Neuroscience reveals a chilling truth. Compulsive behaviors physically reshape your brain. Dopamine receptors downregulate. Prefrontal cortex activity dims. The very machinery of decision-making is hijacked. You're not choosing anymore. You're being chosen by your past. The social contagion addiction is never just personal. It's cultural, relational, generational. Children of addicts are 4x more likely to develop addictions themselves, not just because of genetics, but because pain echoes. Unprocessed trauma gets inherited like a cursed heirloom. And in our hyper-connected world, addiction spreads like a virus. Social media algorithms prey on loneliness. Work culture glorifies burnout. Consumerism sells us quick fixes for existential wounds. We've created what philosopher Jean Baudrillard called the hell of the same, endless cycles of stimulation that never satisfy, only perpetuate. The spiritual bankruptcy, the most devastating consequence, isn't physical or psychological, it's existential. Addiction starves the human spirit of its deepest needs: purpose, authenticity, transcendence. Viktor Frankl observed in Nazi concentration camps that those who lost their why to live quickly deteriorated. Modern society has perfected a more insidious version of this. We've built a world where millions have food, shelter, entertainment, but no reason to wake up in the morning beyond the next hit, the next like, the next purchase. This is the true horror. Not that people die for their addictions, but that they live for them and call it living. The point of no return. All of this raises an uncomfortable question. Is recovery even possible in a society that manufactures addiction at industrial scale? The answer is yes, but not in the way we've been taught. Real healing doesn't begin with quitting. It begins with waking up. The moment you realize your addiction isn't your enemy, it's your desperate attempt at self-preservation, everything changes. This is where true liberation begins. Not with fighting your cravings, but with understanding them. The radical first step. Stop shaming yourself. Society tells you addiction is a moral failing. Neuroscience proves it's a natural response to unnatural circumstances. Gabor Maté's breakthrough insight. Don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. Your addictive behaviors developed for a reason. They were the best solution your psyche could find at the time. Recognizing this isn't making excuses, it's acknowledging reality. This is where Jung's shadow work becomes crucial. Until you bring these wounded parts of yourself into consciousness, they'll keep controlling you from the shadows. Rewriting your nervous system's code. Willpower fails because it addresses the symptom, not the cause. Real change requires neurobiological reprogramming. Safety first. Your brain won't release its death grip on coping mechanisms until it feels truly safe. This means establishing non-negotiable boundaries, creating environments that don't trigger survival mode, learning somatic techniques to regulate your nervous system. The replacement principle, Neuroscience, abhors a vacuum. You can't just remove an addiction, you must replace it with healthier sources of dopamine through exercise, creativity, achievement, connection. Secure relationships replace chemical bonds. Meaning, purpose is the ultimate antidote to addiction. The 90-day neuroplasticity window. It takes approximately 3 months for new neural pathways to solidify. This isn't about white-knuckling through withdrawal. It's about consistently choosing better coping strategies until they become automatic. The existential vaccine. Viktor Frankl's logotherapy reveals the ultimate hack. Suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. When you reframe your struggle as a message from your deepest self, a call to grow stronger where you've been hurt most. Your personal hero's journey. Your personal hero's journey, the very pain you've been running from, becomes your greatest ally. This is why 12-step programs emphasize spiritual awakening. Not necessarily religious, but transpersonal. You need something bigger than yourself to hold on to when withdrawal screams at you to relapse. Building your anti-fragile identity. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, love of one's fate, becomes practical here. Inventory your triggers. What situations, people, or emotions send you reaching for your addiction? These are your growth edge. Develop stress immunity. Like vaccines introduce weakened viruses to build immunity. Gradually expose yourself to triggers in safe doses while practicing healthier responses. Create a personal philosophy. Addicts in recovery who develop strong belief systems, whether philosophical, spiritual, or values-based, have significantly lower relapse rates. Your addiction filled a vacuum. What will you put in its place? The community paradox. Here's what no one tells you. You can't heal alone, but you must do the work yourself. The lie of modern individualism is that recovery is a solo journey. The truth, connection is the antidote to addiction, but only if it's authentic connection. This is why indigenous cultures treating addiction use communal rituals. Veterans recover better when reintegrated into tight-knit units. The most effective rehab programs focus on rebuilding social bonds. Your addiction isolated you. Your recovery must reconnect you, but this time on your terms, the turning point. Freedom begins when you realize your addiction wasn't the problem, it was your solution, a maladaptive one. Yes, but the only one you knew. Now you get to develop better solutions. There is a secret about addiction that changes everything once you truly see it. Your addiction was never your enemy. It was your unconscious rebellion against a world that tried to erase your humanity. Let's uncover the final revelation paradox, the paradox of surrender. All this time, you've been fighting the wrong battle. You thought recovery meant defeating your addiction. But true freedom comes when you realize what you resist persists. Carl Jung understood this deeply. I'd rather be whole than good. Your addictive patterns weren't random. They were compensations for parts of yourself you disowned. The workaholism compensating for feelings of inadequacy. The moment you stop fighting these behaviors and start listening to them, they begin to transform. The Alchemy of Pain, Gabor Maté, reveals the radical truth. Your addiction contains the blueprint for your healing. Every craving is a coded message. The urge to drink is really a thirst for emotional release. The need to scroll is actually starvation for real connection. The compulsion to work is a distorted cry for self-worth. This is what the alchemists understood. The poison contains. The French philosopher Pascal saw this centuries ago. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Your addiction was trying to give you what religion, art, and community used to provide, an escape from the unbearable flatness of modern existence. True recovery isn't about subtraction, it's about transmutation. You must become an alchemist of your own soul. Recognize the holy longing behind every craving, redirect that energy. Toward authentic transcendence. Rebuild your life as a temple, worthy of your spirit. This is why former addicts often become the most spiritually awake people. They've touched the void and returned with wisdom. The final truth, after all this searching, here's what it comes down to. Your addiction was love, a twisted, desperate, misguided love. But love nonetheless. Love for life when it became too painful. Love for yourself when you didn't know how else to cope. Now you get to choose. Will you keep expressing that love through self-destruction? Or will you honor the sacred impulse behind your cravings by finding real fulfillment? The door is open. The choice is yours. Walk through. Now you've traveled from the illusion of control, where addiction hijacks your biology and rewires your identity, through the roots of pain that reveal trauma, not weakness, as the source of your escape. Witnessed how avoidance silently erodes your soul, discovered practical rebellion to reclaim your nervous system, and arrived at the ultimate truth. Your addiction was always a wounded form of self-love, waiting to be understood and redirected. If you ever feel yourself slipping, if the old cravings whisper or shame tries to drag you back, pause, breathe. Remember this moment. I may not be there in person, but these words are my hand on your shoulder saying you are not alone. Leave a comment right now. Write just one word. Help lost. Here and I will reply. No judgment, no empty advice, just a real person who understands, standing with you in the dark until you see your own light again. When the night feels too long, come back here. Read this again. We'll rebuild, one honest step at a time. Together, this isn't the end. It's the beginning of a life where you no longer need to escape yourself.